This film begins by showing Max Ballister, an honest police officer who is highly dedicated to his job. Currently, Max and his wife, Linda, live in the city of Los Angeles, which has a high crime rate. While on his way to the office, Max accidentally sees two corrupt police officers arresting two cartel members. The corrupt police officers confiscate evidence in the form of ready-to-distribute drug packages. However, the evidence that should have been handed over to the investigative team is instead given to someone else. Max, who witnesses this, immediately takes a photo to use as evidence to trap the two corrupt police officers. Unfortunately, the two corrupt officers notice Max taking pictures of their actions, prompting him to hurriedly leave the scene. That night, Max reviews the photos he took earlier in the day, showing the two corrupt police officers handing over the drug package evidence to someone in a car. Unfortunately, he cannot identify the identity of the drug package recipient because only the man's hands are visible. At that moment, Max is contacted by his informant, Gary, who claims to have important information related to the mission he is handling, which is why Gary invites Max to meet at a location. Without a second thought, Max agrees to the meeting. As he is about to leave, Max is momentarily stopped by Linda because it is already late at night, but Max ignores her advice and disregards her concerns. Upon arriving at the meeting place, Max quickly rushes to approach Gary until he is suddenly shot by a mysterious figure, causing Max to lose his life. On another day, Max's funeral is held, where Simon, Max's biological father, attends his son's funeral. It is known that Simon is a former gangster boss who once ruled the city and was feared in his time. However, Simon has long since stopped being a gangster after his son decided to become a police officer. At that moment, Simon feels devastated by the death of his beloved son, especially since they have not spoken for 10 years due to family disputes. Simon then immediately asks Linda about the cause of his son's death, where Linda explains that according to the police, Max died in a routine robbery, but Linda does not believe it. On the contrary, Linda suspects that Max was deliberately set up to be killed, considering he had received a mission to apprehend a gangster group involved in drug trafficking that included corrupt police officers. Hearing this, Simon, who cannot accept his son's death, intends to carry out a revenge mission. Therefore, Simon decides to temporarily stay in the city. Simon then rents a residence owned by a woman named Alice. After inspecting the room he will occupy, Simon returns to his car to get his belongings. Unexpectedly, Simon is confronted by a gangster leader and his subordinates who want to take revenge on him because several years ago, Simon injured him, leaving him in a coma in the hospital. In addition to wanting to kill Simon, the gangster boss also claims he wants to rob Simon's car. Upon hearing this, Simon immediately fights off the two gangsters in front of him and states that he will not leave the city until his revenge mission is complete. That night, Simon opens the case file that Max was handling to search for clues about his son's murderer. Inside the file, Simon finds a business card belonging to a detective named Frank Shaw. The next morning, Simon immediately goes to the police station to meet Frank and inquire about the progress of Max's death case. At that time, Frank explains that the perpetrator has not yet been found, but he promises to investigate Max's murder thoroughly. Simon then asks if Frank knows or has ever met Max in person. Frank then explains that he has only been on duty in Los Angeles for a week, so he hasn't had the chance to get to know Max or meet him. Upon hearing this explanation, Simon begins to suspect that Frank is connected to Max's death. Furthermore, Simon realizes that Frank has lied by saying he doesn't know his son, even though Max has kept his business card and phone number. Nevertheless, Simon does not want to act rashly without stronger evidence of Frank's involvement. When night falls, Gary comes to see Simon and claims to be an informant for Max. It turns out that Gary knows Simon as a former gangster boss who once held power in Los Angeles. Simon's brutality in the past even earned him the nickname the Brave One. After that, Gary mentions that on the night of Max's death, he was supposed to meet him, but Max was shot by an unknown assailant. With this testimony, Simon asks Gary for help in tracking down the identities of those responsible for Hi's son's death. Strangely, Gary refuses to help Simon because he is afraid of meeting the same fate as Max. Not long after Gary leaves, Simon is attacked by a group of gangsters. However, with his experience as a former gangster leader, Simon is able to easily defeat everyone who attacks him. Simon then asks the gangsters he has defeated who sent them to kill him. However, the gang members choose to remain silent until Simon becomes frustrated and shoots them. Elsewhere at a gangster hideout, a gangster boss named Armand Tucker is discussing his illegal business with his associate, Benny. It turns out that Armand is known as a very brutal figure who shows no mercy, which is evident when he becomes angry with Benny and easily shoots his business partner dead over a trivial matter. At that moment, Frank arrives and asks if Simon has managed to take care of Armand. Frank states that as long as Simon is alive, their lives will be at risk, considering he will continue to investigate the case of Max's murder, which they committed. Armand then explains that he has sent his men to eliminate Simon. From their conversation, it becomes clear that they are in collusion in running the drug business in Los Angeles. Moreover, since Max had seen Frank conducting the illegal business, he asks Armand to kill Max so that his identity as a corrupt detective will not be exposed. Moments later, Armand's right-hand man comes to report their failure to eliminate Simon. Upon learning this, Armand is furious with his men for failing to take out Simon, who is alone. When Armand is about to shoot his subordinate, Frank tries to stop him, saying that Simon will be a problem for them. Additionally, Frank is worried that Simon will seek revenge for Max's death. Calmly, Armand dismisses Simon, a former gangster boss known for his brutality. Furthermore, Armand believes he is far more terrifying than Simon, who is old and no longer holds power. With his position as the only strongest gangster in Los Angeles, Armand claims he can easily get rid of Simon. In fact, he is eager to eliminate Simon with his own hands. Shifting to Simon, who is recounting his dark past to Alice. At that moment, Simon explains that Max is the reason he decided to leave the criminal world, but now he is forced to return as a brutal gangster to seek revenge for his son's death. The next day, Simon meets with Gary again, as he thinks Gary knows the identity of the person who killed his son. Furthermore, Simon says he is willing to pay any amount as long as Gary agrees to help him. Because of the substantial payment, Gary eventually agrees to speak, informing Simon about a Mexican gangster boss known as El Chivo. Apparently, Gary suspects that El Chivo and his gang were responsible for killing Max that night. So, he immediately tells Simon the address of a nightclub where El Chivo and his gang usually gather. After Simon leaves, Gary is approached by Isaiah, who is Gary's older brother and is known to be a member of Armand's crew. It turns out that Isaiah comes to warn his brother not to deal with Simon anymore, because if Armand finds out, he won't hesitate to eliminate him. Additionally, it is revealed that Gary intentionally pitted Simon against El Chivo to protect Isaiah, who was involved in Max's murder. That night, Simon goes to the nightclub to meet El Chivo, who he already knows as a former business associate. At that moment, Simon asks if El Chivo was the one who killed his son, which El Chivo immediately denies. El Chivo states that it is impossible for him to do such a thing, given that Simon is an old friend whom he greatly respects. As a result, El Chivo informs Simon about Armand, who has become the new gangster boss in Los Angeles. El Chivo is convinced that it was Armand and his gang who killed Max. Additionally, El Chivo explains that Armand's gang often causes trouble in his territory by seizing drug packages belonging to his group. However, El Chivo feels powerless to act because Armand and his gang are protected by corrupt police officers. Hearing this confession, Simon realizes that Gary has lied to him and deliberately pitted him against El Chivo. The next day, while Simon is driving his car, he is suddenly attacked by Isaiah and his accomplices, resulting in a high-speed chase filled with gunfire. Simon then lures the gang members who are attacking him to a secluded area, where he successfully disables both of them. Simon then gets out of the car and interrogates Isaiah about who assigned them. Feeling cornered, Isaiah finally admits that they were assigned by Armand. A few hours later, Isaiah reports to Armand that he has failed to eliminate Simon. This makes Armand increasingly furious because his subordinate has failed again to kill Simon. Additionally, Armand is upset as to why Isaiah informed Simon that he was behind the attack. In his anger, Armand assigns Isaiah once again to kill Simon, but threatens that if he fails again, he will eliminate Gary. Switching to Gary, who is being hunted by El Chivo's gang. At that moment, El Chivo's men are furious with Gary for pitting Simon against their boss. Just as they are about to attack him, Simon appears to save Gary by taking down the gang members. As a result, Gary expresses his gratitude for Simon saving his life and apologizes for having pitted Simon against El Chivo. Consequently, Gary admits that he did all of this to protect his older brother's life. Knowing this, Simon promises Gary that he will not harm Isaiah as long as he tells him the address of Armin's gang hideout. Despite this, Gary refuses and walks away from Simon. Unexpectedly, Simon secretly places a listening device in Gary's bag. A little later, Gary calls Isaiah to inform him that Simon is looking for Armin's gang hideout to eliminate Armand and all of his men. However, Isaiah tells Gary not to worry because Armin's gang will eliminate Simon first. Isaiah then invites Gary to join in his gang's criminal activities that night, which will involve robbing El Chivo's cartel. From circulating information, it is rumored that El Chivo will conduct a large drug transaction. At the same time, Simon, who also hears the conversation between Isaiah and Gary, plans to head to the location of the drug transaction. Upon arriving at the specified location, Simon sees Armand and Frank preparing to carry out the robbery. While El Chivo's gang is conducting the transaction, Frank immediately takes action, slaughtering them one by one with a sniper rifle. Not long after, Armand and his men take the transaction money along with the drug packages belonging to the now-dead members of El Chivo's gang. At that moment, Simon is unarmed, which prevents him from being able to help El Chivo's gang. Even so, Simon finally realizes that Frank is a corrupt officer who is conducting illegal business with Armand. Simon then installed a GPS device under Armand's and Frank's car so that he could easily follow them as they headed to Armand's secret hideout. With ease, Simon managed to infiltrate the hideout and overheard a conversation between Armand and Frank about selling the drugs to a Colombian cartel. Additionally, the transaction was scheduled to take place tomorrow night. After finishing their conversation, they left the secret hideout. Soon after, Simon seized the opportunity to enter the drug storage room. A few hours later, Simon was back at his lodging, and from the tracker he had placed on Armand's car, he discovered that the gang was heading to the lodging to eliminate him. Simon then told Alice to hide while he would confront the gangsters. Without wasting much time, Simon managed to take out most of Armand's men. Feeling that the place was no longer safe, Simon quickly urged Alice to leave. Unfortunately, outside the place, Simon found himself facing Armand and the remaining gang members. In the shootout, Simon was shot while protecting Alice. Just before Armand and his men could finish them off, the sound of police sirens was heard, causing Armand and his men to flee. After his condition began to improve, Simon continued his quest for revenge by planning to visit Gary to find out the location of Armand's hideout. Upon arriving at Gary's house, Simon was confronted by Isaiah, who immediately attacked him because he didn't want to waste time. Simon then forced Gary to talk about Max's death. Despite being pressed, Gary, wanting to protect Isaiah, did not reveal to Simon that the shooter who killed Max was Frank. In response, Simon said he would forgive Gary as long as he provided the address of Armand's gang hideout and Frank's address. After obtaining the addresses of the perpetrators, Simon returned to the lodging to get weapons to complete his revenge mission. Switching to Armand and Frank, the two were seen conducting a transaction with the Colombian cartel, unaware that Simon had successfully infiltrated the hideout. As a result, the transaction went awry because Simon had previously swapped all the drug packages Armand had stored with flour. Feeling cheated, the Colombian cartel became furious and engaged in a shootout with Armand's gang. At the same time, Simon was also taking out Armand's men one by one. Because of the shootout, members of the Colombian cartel and Armand's gang ended up dead, leaving only Armand and Frank. Furthermore, due to running out of ammunition, Frank was forced to duel with Simon, who easily took down the corrupt detective. When Armand prepared to kill Simon, Simon swiftly turned the tables and managed to eliminate him. At the end of the film, Simon is seen walking out of the gangster hideout after completing his revenge. Moral lesson from the story: sometimes being a good cop means dodging bullets, but remember, if you can't identify the hands behind the crime, you might just end up in a flower fight instead.